I want to get to a couple of questions I've written down, and then we'll get back to the ones that are showing up on Twitter. These are fantastic. Since it got alluded to already, what is the state of the media today? Let's just get to kind of the core question. Where is the media right now? Is it solvent? Is it struggling? Is it both? Where are we? Where are we with the media? Anyone?
I mean, yeah, it's both. It's interesting. I've been coming here. How long have you been teaching this class?
Since 2009.
Okay, so this has been here. And in some ways, things haven't changed all that much. I mean, the media was in the toilet in some way, and especially newspapers, in 2009, and still there in 2015. But in that time, a lot of really fascinating things have started to happen that give me more hope in 2013 than I had in 2009. And what's really fascinating about it is a lot of that stuff is actually happening at the Omaha World Herald. I mean, this isn't a story, you know, sort of the change in the media story that you have to look to the coast. I mean, you can look at the Omaha World Herald in 2013, and I bet you could pick out some ways that it's different than it was in 2009 or 1999, probably better. One of the ways that it's different is actually my column. I mean, this wasn't some sort of master plan, but the idea basically is we need to get more interesting. We need to write things about people that other people can connect to. The classic sort of Associated Press journalism is good, and there's a total function for that, both in journalism and in society. But I think, especially for the World Herald, there was a fear that we had gone too far that way, that we had too many people that could do that, but didn't write about somebody interesting sitting in this class right now. So that's what they basically told me to do, which is that, I mean, it really is an amazing job. I find interesting stories about people, and then I write them. That's my entire job. That's not really, I somehow turned the state of the media into the state of myself. So inherent selfishness there. But one of the things that is changing is Warren Buffett's buying newspapers. Bezos just bought the Washington Post. There are a bunch of really rich, really smart people getting involved. And you have to ask yourself why. I mean, part of the reason is because it's really, really cheap to buy a newspaper as compared to what it was to buy a newspaper 15 or 20 years ago. I mean, you'd have to look at the sale of the Boston Globe to see. The New York Times bought it in the early 90s. I don't remember what the sale price was. Let's say it was $1 bazillion, and then they just sold it, and it was like 27 cents. I mean, it was seriously insane how different it had gotten in the last 20 years. So, but what these guys think is that basically, okay, there is a bottom. We're close to it. They're a bargain right now, and we can start to figure out ways via technology to make this profitable enough that it's smart to own these newspapers. So there's obviously the how do you make money off it, and there's also a shift in journalism, I think, specifically newspaper journalism, to, and this ties to the column, sort of how do you make it so people want to read it. We didn't really think about that much in newspaper journalism for a long, long time. We didn't have to. The newspaper was basically the only game in town. If you wanted advertising, you went to the newspaper. If you wanted the weather, you went to the newspaper, which is hilarious, right? The idea that you open the newspaper to see what the temperature was going to be on a certain day. I mean, every classified ads, everything, and all that went away, right? Or it dispersed to these 1,000 other ways. And you could also get, you don't need your international news from the Omaha World Herald. You have, experienced seasoned journalists in the countries where you want to read about it. You don't need me to write about what's going on in Oman today, for example. But what I can do, and what they can't do, is I can write a story about somebody from, and I'm doing this right now actually, so I'll bring it up. A professor on this campus from Afghanistan has an amazing story about how he got to this point. And it ties to the death of his father and not knowing what happened to his dad for decades. It's a super compelling story. It's about a person, and it's also about Afghanistan. That's what I can do, and it's local. I mean, seriously, he works a couple hundred yards from where we're sitting right now. That to me, is one of the really fascinating and ultimately changes at the World Herald, American newspapers in general, that I think will sustain us.
All right, so another three of you. What is the state of the media right now?
Well, let me throw a question out to you all. I can say y'all because I went to Missouri. I'm qualified to say y'all. What's the main job of the media? What's the main job of a newspaper or a television station? What's its main purpose?
To report the news.
No?
Money.
Huh?
Money.
Money. You got to make a profit. You have to. You have to make money. And it's a business for somebody. It has an owner or shareholders or something like that, and you have to make money. And that's what's been declining in the last few years. As Matthew said a few years ago, if you wanted to advertise your product, you had radio, television, newspapers, billboards, and direct mail. And those were probably pretty much your choices. Right? Now we have so many more choices, and a lot of the ad revenue has flowed away from what was the main thing. Now another question. Matthew also mentioned Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos. What have they been best at? What's been their strength? Money, making money. All right? So we hope that there are new people who have new ideas about how to inject new revenue into all of these media forms. Of all of them, radio has probably been the best at reinventing itself over and over and over again, and the people within the radio stations. But that's what they're all going to have to do, is sort of reinvent themselves. And Matthew talked about one important thing. One of the things we're changing in the School of Communication about the way we teach journalism is that we're now teaching more of a storytelling. Newspapers, journalism has always been about facts, and we write the facts, and they can be pretty dry at times. And I'll give you an example. When I was in Oman, I was complaining to the students about the immaturity of the Omani media, and that they weren't covering social issues very well. And so one day a student brought me an article out of an English language newspaper and said, here's one. This is really good reporting. And it was maybe 8 column inches long, which is not very long. And it was a story about the lack of hospital beds available for people trying to recover from heroin addiction. Okay? There were like 1,200 beds and 17,000 addicts or something like that. And then we quoted a doctor, and they quoted a nurse, and someone from the Ministry of Health. And I said, do you care that there were only 1,200 beds? Well, what do you mean? I said, does it make any difference to you? Not really. I said, don't just tell me that there are only 1,200 beds. Tell me about the 22-year-old father who is desperately trying to recover from his addiction and cannot get a bed in a recovery unit. Tell me about his son who is going hungry because of his addiction. Tell me about his wife who is miserable being married to this man who cannot recover because he can't get in. Tell me about the mother who is heartbroken. Make me care that there are only 1,200 beds. And that's what will bring people in. That's what Matthew is doing, and that's what other people at the World Herald are doing as well. Make us care. Yes, you have to have the facts, but make us care about the facts. Put them in the context that gives them some sort of meaning to me.
Reed, sure.
Well, I think the days of 30-minute newscasts, hour newscasts, will come to an end in the next 10 years. Hopefully not less than that. It's just there are so many forms of getting more information. Social media, Google, the World Herald, other TV stations, CNN, whatever you use. Your cell phone is feeding you news constantly, all the time. This is our biggest competitor when it comes to news. You on your cell phone because you're not listening to us. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, eventually things will just be recorded, they'll get put online. You're going to click on whatever 15 minutes you want to watch. Maybe we'll do some cut-ins during, network broadcasting, that kind of thing. But I really do think that just because everyone knows how to find news, that it's just going to take less people. There are some stations now that are outsourcing their news. Fox 42 in town is an example of that. I think 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, they went bankrupt. Couldn't pay the bills, couldn't keep the lights on. And there's a station in Davenport, Iowa that bought them along with like 6 other stations. Anyway, all their news and everything comes out of Davenport. They have local reporters that like FTP everything back, you know, like send the video back or whatever. And that's where the news gets done. They had the same anchors for 5 different stations. So I really do see that becoming as a thing that might start trending. Like I said, I'm not like psychic. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I just know that these are things that are happening.
Sherry, where are we?
Well, the state of the media, those of us who work in journalism education are trying to find that out, as well as the journalists themselves, trying to figure out where we go from here. The difficult part in terms of teaching it is that there's still a need for the basic skills if you are going to work in broadcasting, print, online journalism, whatever it is you're going to do. You still have to be able to write, you still have to be able to ask intelligent questions, you still have to be able to do storytelling, as Chris and Matthew were talking about. You still need a lot of those basic skills. And so, you know, a class that we have called media writing, which is kind of the introductory writing class to this whole style of writing, is probably not going to go away anytime soon. It's something that you still need a lot of those basic skills. At the same time, the industry, or industries, maybe I should say, broadcasting, print, whatever, have been turned upside down. I mean, the internet and social media have just made everything very different, obviously, than it was when, for example, Chris and I started in the industry a number of years ago. So the challenge is to try to figure out where it's going. And as Dr. Allen was alluding to, we've spent a lot of time in the School of Communication over the last few years trying to figure out what that means for curriculum in terms of what we need to be teaching students. We have started classes called Media Storytelling 1 and Storytelling 2, which are incorporating online skills where you're learning to put things online, write for online. And we're hoping to do a fairly in-depth overhaul of our curriculum. We've been kind of phasing in some of these classes in an in-depth overhaul of our curriculum, which we're hoping is going to start next fall. That wouldn't affect most of you unless you were still here and chose to move into what we're doing with the major. But so there's things we have to keep teaching that journalists need to keep doing, but everything has changed. And where that's all going to go, we don't know at this point. I mean, in one sense, everybody has become a journalist, you know, citizen journalism. People witnessing something and, you know, telling their story has become a very big part of it. So the future, in many ways, is a big question mark.